Hey guys, I'm back and we're going to keep reading more of Found by Margaret Peterson Haddix. So far in the story, a plane appeared out of nowhere with only babies on it, and then the two boys, Jonah and Chip. Jonah knew he was adopted, he was fine with it. Chip finds out he's adopted, freaks out, right? He's like 13 years old and never knew. And then they decide to try to investigate Chip's background. They find a phone number in his parents' safe, they call it, and they are in contact with the FBI. So things are getting pretty intense, and we're going to pick back up with chapter 5. What did you do that for? Chip demanded. I don't think this is the right way to do this, Jonah said. Sneaking around, looking at papers your parents don't want you to see, calling people. I know you're really mad at your parents right now. Okay, fine. I don't blame you, but this isn't gonna help. Calm down, let them calm down. Wait until you can all sit down and talk about it. Chip shoved hard against Jonah's chest, pushing him away. The phone fell to the floor between them. I don't know what your parents are like, Chip said harshly, but if my dad says he doesn't want to talk about something, he doesn't talk. He grabbed the phone and began punching numbers again. Okay, so maybe family therapist was out as a future career option for Jonah. Maybe you should talk to one of the counselors at school or something, Jonah said. Chip kept punching numbers, stabbing them even harder now. I'm not crazy, he insisted. I never said you were, Jonah countered. He guessed Chip had hit about 5 of the 7 numbers for James Reardon now. But tell me, what do you think the FBI has to do with your adoption? Chip stopped hitting numbers. Jonah eased the phone out of Chip's hands. He pressed the button to hang up. Think about it, Jonah said. This Reardon guy probably doesn't have anything to do with you. That post-it must have been on some other paper in there. Maybe, is your dad a spy or something? He's a stockbroker, Chip muttered. He cleared his throat. If he was a spy, he'd probably be on the terrorist side. Maybe he's secretly working for the government, Jonah said. Maybe he's like a double agent and he's pretending to launder money for some terrorists, but really, he's reporting everything to the government. And maybe if you call this number and blow his cover, like 5 years of secret agent work will go to waste, and you'll have to start all over again, and it will be all your fault. Jonah had seen a movie once where something like that happened. You think my dad's a hero? Chip asked. Fat chance. But he didn't grab the phone back to begin dialing again. He just stood there, looking lost. I just want to know who I really am, Chip said. His words came out as a whimper, the kind of sound no self-respecting 13-year-old boy would want anyone to hear him making. Jonah decided not to make fun of him for it. I do too, Jonah said. You do? Chip asked, and this too came out sounding pitiful. Jonah nodded. Well, yeah, I mean, my parents are okay, and I guess it's possible to have a worse sister than Catherine, but sometimes I wonder, who do I look like? Are my birth parents good people who just kind of made a mistake? Or are they druggies, alcoholics, criminals? Are they in jail? Mental hospitals? Did they have any other kids besides me? Did they keep the other kids? Sometimes Jonah's mom would say things like, you have such great dimples and such beautiful eyes. Do you suppose they came from your birth mother or your birth father? Or, you're so good at math. Wonder who you inherited that from? It annoyed him because he knew those lines came straight out of the adoption books. And generally, people whose lives were going great, NFL quarterbacks, rock stars, famous actors and actresses, genius scientists, generally, they didn't give their kids up for adoption. What bad things had he inherited, along with the eyes and the dimples and the ability to glide through 7th grade math? Chip was nodding. Monday morning, he said in a hoarse voice, when I walked into school, I kept looking around thinking, I could have a brother or sister here, and I wouldn't even know it. So I stared at everyone, looking for curly hair and long skinny legs and nostrils that flare out a little. Is that why you walked into that wall on the way to lunch? Jonah asked. Yeah, Chip said. He sounded embarrassed. Jonah eased the post-it note out of Chip's hand. He waved it slightly in front of Chip's eyes. This isn't any good, Jonah said. No matter what, you're always going to have more questions. How do you know? Chip challenged him. Have you ever tried to get your questions answered? Chapter 6. It was Cincinnati chili night. Mom liked to have themed dinners every so often, and lately she'd been on a geographic kick. Spicy New Orleans jambalaya one week, thick New England clam chowder the next, authentic, she said, Mexican hot tamales the next. At least Cincinnati chili was fairly normal, though Jonah failed to see the point of putting chili on top of spaghetti when ragu worked just as well. Do you think, he started to say, but everyone was passing around the containers of shredded cheese and chopped onions, and no one seemed to hear him. A few minutes later, while Catherine was chewing and actually had her mouth shut for once, he tried again. You know how you always said that if... Catherine finished chewing. Oh, I almost forgot, she exploded. Guess who says she's trying out for cheerleader next year? Do you mind? Jonah asked. I was talking first. Catherine took a gulp of milk. Okay, go on, she said, but hurry up because this is really funny. All right, Jonah said with injured dignity. What I was saying was, he swallowed hard. Would you just spit it out? Catherine demanded. Jonah glared at his sister. He could hear Chip's question echoing in his head. Have you ever tried to get your questions answered? What was the name of the adoption agency where you got me? He blurted. For a moment, it felt like he'd thrown a grenade out into the center of the table. Even Catherine was speechless for once. Then Mom smiled. We've told you before, but I guess you forgot, she said. It was called Hope for Children. Awfully schmaltzy, I know, but it felt right to us then, because we had so much hope, and that was all we had until... Okay, Jonah said quickly, because he could tell she was about to launch into the miracle story. The call out of the blue, the week before Christmas, everything we ever wanted. He didn't have the patience for that right now, not when he had so much to think about. Hope for Children was a stupid name, but he was relieved somehow that it wasn't the Happy Family Adoption Agency, the same one that Chip's family had dealt with. This made the matching letters about being one of the missing seem more like a coincidence, more like an ordinary 7th grade prank. Dad was wiping his mouth with his napkin. Was there anything else you wanted to know, Jonah? He asked in a voice that was trying way too hard to sound casual. It was almost as bad as the time Dad had said on a fishing trip. You know you can ask me anything you want about puberty. Jonah couldn't decide. Can we talk about something that isn't ancient history? Catherine interrupted. Catherine, wait your turn, Mom said. Jonah? Across the table, Catherine crossed her eyes and stuck out her tongue. Jonah looked down at his plate. Well, I kind of wondered, now that I'm older, if there's any more information they could give us about, my birth parents, Jonah said. Not that it really matters. I'm just curious, did either of them have dimples, like me? Dimples, Catherine snorted indignantly. Mom shot her one of those looks that said, as clear as day, if I hear one more word out of you, young lady, before you have permission to speak, I will cover your mouth with duct tape for the rest of the night. Of course, Mom had never done anything like that, but her looks always made you believe she might. Dad very, very carefully laid his fork on his plate. I can certainly call the agency and see if there's any more information available, he said, but I have to warn you, it's not likely. They weren't even willing to give us a medical history. Not that we minded, Mom said quickly. We were just happy to get you. Now, Mom and Dad were both beaming at him, stereo smiles. Jonah kicked Catherine under the table. Tell your stupid cheerleader story, he muttered. Later that night, while Jonah was sitting at his desk doing his social studies homework, Catherine shoved her way into his room. Don't do this, she said, standing dramatically in his doorway. What, social studies? Catherine cast a glance over her shoulder. She stepped aside and eased the door shut behind her. Then, almost cautiously, for her, she sat down on the edge of his bed. No, she said, the whole adopted kid search for identity thing. Jonah pressed his pencil down too hard on the sapiens part of Homo sapiens, and the lead snapped. He dropped the pencil and whirled around. What's it to you? He asked. Hey, I'm part of this family too, Catherine said. No, duh, he thought about snarling. Of course you are. You're actually related by blood. You belong more than I do. But that wasn't a very Jonah thing to say. It was like all those cruel things Chip had been saying about his dad all afternoon. Those were just Chip being mad, and surely couldn't be true. He decided to stick with no duh as his best comeback. Catherine rolled her eyes. Look, she said, it makes them mental every time you bring up the adoption or your birth parents or anything like that. They start pussyfooting around and being so careful, like, now Jonah. She dropped her voice an octave, a pretty decent imitation of Dad. I can certainly call the agency. We'll do anything we can. We would never want your adoption to impede your self-actualization. Whoa, where did Catherine learn a term like self-actualization? So what, Jonah said, and why is it my fault? They're the ones who always bring up the story of how they got me. Blah, 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 call out of the blue, blah, 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 blinding rainstorm the night we picked you up. Catherine giggled. Then she leaned forward, her eyes round and earnest. Yeah, but see, that's the past, she said. That's the beginning of the story of them having kids. It's their story with you. It's like them telling about giving me Barbie stickers to get me potty trained, or telling about the time I threw up into Mom's purse. Jonah snorted, remembering. That had been funny. Catherine eyed him suspiciously. You haven't told anybody at school those stories, have you? She asked. No, why would I? Who cares? Catherine nodded approvingly. You better not, she said. She glanced toward the door once more. When you start talking about wanting to know more about your birth parents, that's different. You know what they're doing down there right now, don't you? They're reading those books again. Jonah didn't have to ask which ones she meant. They're trying to figure out what they're supposed to say so you don't start acting out and using drugs and flunking out as your cry for help. Jonah realized that Catherine had probably read Raising the Well-Adjusted Adopted Child and Adoption Without Secrets, too. I'm not going to do any of that stuff, Jonah said. That's crazy. Yeah, well, so's getting all worried about your birth parents, because Jonah, now she was leaning so far forward she was only inches from falling off the bed. Your birth parents don't matter. You're Jonah. They could have dimples, or they could have 3 eyes apiece and 6 fingers on every hand, and it doesn't change a thing about you. Jonah kind of thought that might be impossible. 12-fingered, 3-eyed parents having a 10-fingered, 2-eyed kid, but he wasn't sure. Genetics had never been a big interest for him. That's easy for you to say, he muttered in a huff. You can look in the mirror and know exactly where everything came from. Eyes, brown like Mom's, nose, ski slope like Dad's. I do not have a ski slope nose, Catherine protested. It's classical. She turned sideways as if modeling. Classical ski slope, maybe, Jonah said. It is not. Never mind. Catherine waved her hands in front of her face, like she was trying to erase the nose debate. This was a miracle. Catherine backing away from an argument? What I meant to say is, it doesn't matter either. If you're going through some adolescent who am I phase, it's not because you're adopted. Everyone goes through that. I don't know who I am either. Jonah reached out and tapped her on the arm. Catherine Marie Skidmore, remember? He said, daughter of Michael and Linda, granddaughter of... No. Who am I really? Catherine interrupted. Like, next year when we can try out for things. Do I want to be a cheerleader or a basketball player? Do I want people to think Catherine Skidmore, airhead, but what a hottie? Or Catherine Skidmore, but what a jock? Jonah was torn. He wanted to tease. Regardless, it'll be airhead, definitely not a hottie. But he also kind of wanted to offer some profound, big brotherly advice along the lines of, Catherine, you idiot, it's what you are that matters, not what people think you are. He was saved from making a decision because someone knocked on his door just then. Both he and Catherine jumped guiltily. Is this a private party or adults allowed too? Mom called from the hallway. Catherine shot Jonah a glance that said, See, I told you they're acting mental. Jonah frowned back at her and called out, Come in, to his mother. Mom pushed open the door, but still stood there a little hesitantly. That Cincinnati chili took so long to make, chopping all those onions. I totally forgot. You got some mail today, Jonah, she said, holding out a white envelope. Jonah felt a nervous twitch in his stomach. Mom walked across the room and laid the envelope on his desk beside his social studies book. Once again, there was no return address. It was just a plain, ordinary, unmarked letter addressed to Jonah. If that's an invitation to a birthday party or some other event you want to go to, let me know so I can put it on the calendar, Mom said, still in that unnatural, careful voice she'd used at dinner. Okay, I will, Jonah said. He made no move to open the letter. He didn't even touch it. He bent his head over his social studies book like the most dedicated student in the world. Look, Mom, I'm not in any danger of flunking out. But he could feel Mom and Catherine both staring at him. He sighed. I'll look at it later, okay? I've really got to finish this social studies. We've got a test tomorrow, and I haven't even done the whole study sheet yet, Jonah hinted. Oh, all right. Come on, Catherine. We're being kicked out, Mom said. Jonah, let me know if you want any help reviewing later. Jonah waited until they were both gone, and the door was firmly latched. He picked up the envelope and went over to sit on the floor with his back pressed against the door so he'd have some warning if anyone tried to come in. Carefully, he eased his finger under the flap of the envelope and gently lifted it. He could tell even before he pulled the letter out that most of it was blank. He fumbled unfolding it, one edge of the paper getting stuck against the other side, and then it was open. He flattened the paper against the floor so he could see every word all at once. There were 7 this time. Beware, they're coming back to get you. Chapter 7. You didn't tell anyone? Chip asked. I just told you, didn't I? Jonah said. No, I mean like a grown-up, your parents. Jonah shrugged miserably. They were at the bus stop, but standing apart from the other kids, out of the glow of the streetlight. It was the next morning, and he'd just quietly filled Chip in on the contents of his latest letter. What am I supposed to say? Jonah asked, twisting his face into an imitation of a terrified little kid and making his voice come out high and squeaky. Oh, Mommy, Daddy, that piece of paper scared me. He dropped his voice back to its normal register. Catherine thinks they're freaking out anyhow, just because I asked a few questions last night. Chip glanced away, and Jonah followed his gaze. In the darkness, the other kids were mostly miscellaneous blobs, but Jonah could pick out Catherine's bright orange jacket in the middle of a huge cluster of kids. It sounded like she was competing with her friends Emma and Rachel to see who could squeal the loudest. Maybe Catherine's the one who sent that letter, Chip said. I didn't get one. Maybe she's just playing a trick on you. Remember, she wanted to rewrite that letter on Saturday to make it a better prank. Jonah thought about how serious Catherine had looked the night before, commanding, "Don't do this." How desperately she seemed to want him and his parents to just act normal. No, he said curtly. It's not Catherine. Well then, what did the letter say again, exactly? Chip asked. Beware, they're coming back to get you, Jonah recited tonelessly. It took no effort to remember. He had stared at the words for so long the night before it seemed like they were imprinted on his eyeballs. Coming back to get you, huh? Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with your, adoption, Chip said. Jonah noticed Chip was still having trouble making himself say the word. Maybe it's a revenge thing. Have you made anybody mad lately? You, Jonah thought, but didn't say. He couldn't blame Chip any more than he blamed Catherine. I'm sure it's just another prank, Jonah said, but he wasn't sure. If anything, he was almost sure that it wasn't. The school bus appeared out of the early morning darkness just then, and he and Chip crammed themselves into the screaming, squealing line of kids jabbering about how Spencer Patton was going to sneak his iPod into math class today, and how Kelly Jefferson had just broken up with Jordan Cohen, and did you hear? 6 kids got sick from eating the cafeteria pizza yesterday. Do you think they'll finally fire the lunch ladies? Jonah hoped that no one else could tell. He felt like he was walking around in a bubble. Even as he climbed up the bus steps, walked down the crowded aisle, and collapsed into the first vacant seat, he felt like he was in a completely different dimension from kids who cared about iPods and math class and breakups and cafeteria pizza. 2 stupid letters, 13 stupid words total, and I'm freaking out. I'm as bad as Mom and Dad. First period was study center, and he forced himself to look over his social studies notes. He studied so hard that second period, the test was a breeze. He filled in the meaningless words, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo sapiens, Neanderthal, with great relief. These, at least, were questions he could answer. He turned in his paper feeling confident that he'd gotten everything right, even the bonuses. See, Catherine, I'm not going to flunk out as a cry for help, he thought. That's going to be my best test grade all year. Some of the other kids evidently weren't so happy. Come on, Mr. Vincent, Spencer Patton said. Even you've got to admit this stuff is stupid. Why do we have to study history anyway? So you know where you came from, Mr. Vincent said. I wish, Jonah thought. And I know, it'll help if anyone ever invents a time machine, Jeremy Evers wisecracked. This way, when you go back in time, you can recognize people, so you'll know who you've got to speak Neanderthal to, and who just uses regular caveman talk. Very funny, Jeremy, Mr. Vincent said in a tone that didn't sound amused. Let's stay within the realm of reality, shall we? The realm of reality. Jonah liked that term. He imagined telling Mr. Vincent about the letters, and having Mr. Vincent shake his head dismissively and say, Come on, Jonah, stay within the realm of reality. Reality was supposed to be social studies tests and cafeteria pizza, not strange letters and worrying that someone was going to snatch him away, worrying he'd made a big mistake not telling Mom and Dad about the letters and having them taken to the police to be fingerprinted. What am I thinking? Mom and Dad would laugh their heads off at me, acting like I should report some 7th grade prank to the police. Mr. Vincent called on Jonah to answer a question, and Jonah didn't even know what he'd asked. The rest of Jonah's day went like that, too. In science class, he dropped a test tube full of a liquid that tested as strongly acidic. It turned out it was only lemon juice, but his lab partner still got mad he'd splashed it on her Abercrombie & Fitch top. In gym class, he got hit in the head with a volleyball. In band, he miscounted the rests and came in at the wrong time, the only trumpet playing in a measure that was supposed to be all flutes. It was like he'd used up all his focus on the social studies test. He was glad when school was finally over, so he'd be able to go home and plop down in front of the TV, and nobody would notice that he wasn't paying attention. But as Jonah stepped down from the school bus that afternoon, the last one off, he heard Chip say in a tense voice, Come with me. Huh? Jonah said, feeling dazed. He hadn't even noticed that Chip was right in front of him. Had he accidentally agreed to help Chip unlock more safes, sort through more records? Had he even spoken to Chip since this morning at the bus stop? Just in my mailbox, Chip said. Jonah stopped in the street and squinted at him stupidly. You know how you can mail 2 letters from the same mailbox on the same day, and they might arrive wherever they're going on different days? Chip asked. Even if where they're going is just 2 different mailboxes on the same street? Comprehension flowed over Jonah. You're scared you might get the letter today, Jonah said. The same letter I got yesterday. Not scared, Chip corrected quickly. I mean, if you're busy, I can get the mail by myself. It's just, you're used to being adopted, and you laugh things off. This is all new to me, you know? Oh yeah, Jonah thought. This day's been a bundle of laughs. But he silently turned and followed Chip toward the mailbox at the end of Chip's driveway. The Winston's mailbox was one of the fancier ones on the block. Instead of being on a wooden post, it was on a brick column. At the top, the bricks encircled the entire box in a graceful arc. Dimly, Jonah wondered how the builder had done that, how the flimsy metal mailbox wasn't crushed by the heavy bricks and mortar. Chip reached into the mailbox and pulled out a thick stack of letters and flyers. Bill, ad. Chip flipped through the stack, sounding more relieved with each letter that wasn't a plain envelope addressed to him without a return address. Jonah noticed that some of the Winston's letters had those yellow forwarding stickers the post office used when people moved, covering an old address with a new one. Wait a minute, Jonah said. When you got that letter on Saturday, was it forwarded from your old address? Or was it this address? I don't know. Chip looked up from his sorting for a moment. This address, I guess. Why? Oh, good, Jonah said. That means it could just be kids from school fooling around. They wouldn't know your old address. Maybe most of the 7th grade had gotten weird letters like his and Chip's. He should have surveyed everyone he knew instead of wandering around in a daze. But how did they know I was adopted when I didn't even know? Chip asked, his voice breaking. He bent his head down over the mail again. Missing doesn't necessarily mean adopted, Jonah argued. Or maybe there's some list in the school office of which kids are adopted, and somebody hacked into the computer system, and they think it's really funny to... He stopped, because Chip didn't seem to be listening anymore. Chip's face had suddenly gone deathly pale. Slowly, he held up 3 letters, all of them plain envelopes without return addresses. All of them were addressed to Chip. 2 of the letters had yellow forwarding labels. One of the labels was peeled back a little, and Jonah could see the words Winnetka, Illinois, below. Winnetka was where Chip used to live. You open them, Chip said. I can't. Jonah took a deep breath and took the letters from Chip. He ripped them open quickly, the same way he took off Band-Aids. You are one of the missing, he read from the first letter. Then, beware, they're coming back to get you. And the next one, again, beware, they're coming back to get you. Someone had sent Chip 2 copies of each letter, one to his old address and one to his new. Wow, Jonah said. Whoever sent these letters really wanted to make sure you got them. Chip opened his mouth, but it didn't seem like he had anything to say. It was more like he'd lost the power to control his jaw. Jonah! Someone shouted far down the block from the direction of Jonah's house. It was Catherine. What? Jonah shouted back. There's a message on the answering machine, Catherine hollered. Dad wants you to call him right away. Jonah didn't care about Catherine's big identity crisis, cheerleader versus basketball player. But, he reflected, she certainly had the lungs of a cheerleader. And it was such a relief to think that, to think something ordinary and pointless and annoying like Catherine. Okay, he yelled back, sounding completely normal. Chip grabbed Jonah's arms. You can use my cell, he said. Dad just doubled the number of minutes I'm allowed to use. It's a bribe, I guess. Like that's gonna make up for keeping a secret from me for 13 years. Like it even matters. Like minutes can make up for years. I'm gonna go over the limit anyhow. If you don't use my cell phone, I'm just gonna have to call some recorded message, leave the phone on for hours. Jonah wondered if Chip was going into shock. It seemed a little irresponsible to leave him alone, babbling like that, so he took the cell phone Chip offered him. He punched in Dad's work number. Hey, Jonah, buddy, Dad said too heartily as soon as Jonah said hello. Did you have a good day at school? I think I got an A on the social studies test, Jonah said, trying to sound however he would normally sound on a normal day. Great, Dad said with way too much enthusiasm. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Well, Dad said, I called the adoption agency today, just like I promised. He paused. Jonah could tell he was supposed to say, oh, thanks, Dad, or really, Dad, you didn't have to do that, or even just, yeah? But Jonah found his mouth was suddenly too dry to say anything. Eva, the social worker who helped us, such a great lady. She's not there anymore, Dad said. But I talked to another woman who looked up your file, and, Jonah, there is new information in your case. Jonah pressed the cell phone more tightly against his ear. He swayed slightly. Oh, he said, and it took such effort to produce that one syllable. A name, Dad said. The social worker was a little confused. She wasn't even sure at first she was allowed to tell me, but It wasn't one of your birth parents. It was just someone listed as having information about you. A contact person. Who was it? Jonah asked, pushing the words out through gritted teeth. Some guy named James Reardon, Dad said. And get this, he works for the FBI. Alright, so we're starting to find some connections between Jonah and Chip. So stay tuned for tomorrow's video and we'll pick back up with Chapter 8 of Found.